In this video we shall talk about test plan sections, and this video will be based on the slides. For those who prefer the video based on the document, please refer to the next video. As usual, we begin with definitions. What is test plan? It's a document that describes all those nice ideas we were talking about in the previous video. So test plan helps us to coordinate testing activities and all team efforts in general. Test plan may contain a lot of sections, as you may see here. The exact list of those sections depends on which software development methodology we use, on what kind of project it is, on what customer we work with, and so on, and so on, and so on. Some sections may be somehow renamed, combined, or split into several other sections. That's not the deal here. Here we're just talking about the main ideas, about the general sections of the general test plan. And let's start. Each slide in this video contains an example at the bottom of the screen, so you may pause the video at any time and read an example. Of course, these examples are extremely short and they are taken out of the context, but they may give you a clue on what may be there in a such section. So the first section is project scope and main goals. This section contains a very brief description of the purpose of the project that is in development. This is like business requirements, but this information is in more condensed form, with a clearer emphasis on the most important tasks from QA point of view. What level of quality we should achieve, what we should pay attention to, what are the main goals, and so on. Speaking about goals, next two sections are related to requirements. The first section is requirements to be tested. This is a list, usually with the links to a proper section in requirements document. We list those requirements, functional or non-functional, that we should test, and usually we should somehow describe in which way shall we test those requirements. Here is just a simple example. In more complex situations, we may have some tables or matrices that show us what and how to test. We may have even more complex, sophisticated approach using some specialized tools, but once again, the main idea here is that we test something according to some approach. And even more important section is requirements not to be tested. Why so? As you can see here in the example, there is always a reason why we shall not test one or another requirement. But we absolutely should mention that this section should be presented in most test plans in order to avoid negative surprises for customer or for a team. Because really not each requirement should be tested. There may be something that does not require testing or does not require even implementation. So there is always something that we shall not test. And this section contains that list. Strategy and approach shows us the most effective and efficient way to achieve our goals. Of course, any goal may be achieved with a lot of different ways. There are a lot of methods, approach types, testing techniques, tools, and so on. What shall we use? How shall we use it? So this section contains the results of corresponding decisions. This is one of the most sophisticated section because it really depends on the type of project, on the technology set, on the frameworks or programming language we use, on the subject matter, and so on and so on. But the more complex project we are developing, the more useful this section is. Criteria helps us avoid subjectivity in taking some decisions or understanding some situations. When shall we start testing? Suspend testing, resume testing, finish testing, and so on. There may be a lot of situations when we need some fact-based analysis. Here's an example. Without a good criteria, we may only rely on our personal point of view, hoping for that point of view comes from our good professionalism. With good criteria, we may not only rely on our experience, but we usually may use some formulas and make some tools to calculate those formulas for us. So we have a good objective way to see if we shall do or shall not do something. Resources section is simple. Here we list all the resources we have or need, such as software, hardware, staff, time, finance, and so on. This section contains such a list. In a big project, this section may also contain some kind of schedule or timetable, because we probably may need some resource here but not there, and once again here and maybe not there. The idea is to know when and what exact resources do we need. Because if the time comes and we do not have that resources, it's waste of time. If this resource is already taken but the time has not yet come, it will be then waste of money. So we must have that exact resources at any properly given time. And we should absolutely know the time. But in some cases, when the time is not the matter, here we probably need some resources through all the project. We only have to know what exact resources we need. Once again, software, hardware, staff, time, okay, it's an important resource, finances, etc., etc., etc. On the previous slide, we have already mentioned schedule. So time is important. As we know, time means money. When shall we achieve one or another goal? When shall we start or stop one or another activity? When shall we do anything we have to do? It's impossible to keep it all in your head. And as you know, if many people work together, these people have to understand, okay, I do something here, my colleagues do something here too, other people also do something, and by some given time we shall come to some result, and then we shall move forward with that result. If this time is unknown for some reason, someone may be too late, someone may be too early, that's not good. But schedule gives us understanding. And of course, customer also looks into the schedule because he wants to know when he can get some results from us, some build to put to production, some tool to use, something useful he pays for. Roles and responsibilities section is also rather simple. We list roles and we emphasize responsibilities. Of course, one may say that usually the role implies the responsibility itself. But sometimes, in some specific scenarios, there may be some sophisticated, complex roles, and those roles may have some sophisticated, complex responsibilities. And for instance, let's imagine that we have several senior developers. What shall each of them do? Maybe someone is responsible for one section of requirements, some is responsible for another functionality, the other is responsible for something else. So this section shows who is responsible for what. It brings clarity, it brings calmness to people, and it brings effectiveness and efficiency to project. There is no project that comes without some risks. So we may not only react to those bad situations, but in an ideal situation we may also somehow predict, foresee this situation in order to react before something bad may happen. Usually, lots of risks are connected with personnel, with time, with money, with some sophisticated technologies, and so on. Here is just a quick example of such risk mentioning. The main idea here is that we should analyze our project, that we should create the list of risks, and we should absolutely mention what to do if we see some signs that this risk is going to happen. Of course, modern project development tools have good capabilities of managing any documentation, but it's usually helpful to have the list of the whole project documentation in order to see what we have, when we have it, or the basis this documentation updates on, and who is responsible. This is also useful for customer. Usually customer likes to look into the documentation. This is useful for any new project member, for the knowledge transfer. We may take the list of the documentation and say, scan through this, read this, ask responsible people if something is not clear, and in a couple of days this new person understands project much better than before. A couple of minutes ago we talked about criteria, and those criteria should be usually based on formulas. So metrics are good helpers for the criteria, because when we have numbers, when we have exact rules of calculating that numbers, and when we may use a machine, a computer, to calculate those numbers for us, it is extremely useful to see some metrics matter that shows us what the situation is. And these formulas, these numbers, these metrics is a kind of that matter. That's absolutely objective. That makes us free from the burden of decision making from only our subjective view, with only our experience. Yes, it may work, but when we have something that helps us, that's calculated automatically, that shows us that something is good or bad or just normal, it's extremely helpful. It allows us to be more confident in those decisions we are taking every time and every day.